In our first section, Defend, we will first hear from John Seth Anderson.
Michael, thank you. And Matt, goodness, thank you for your courage and for sharing. I was deeply moved and deeply appreciative for what I know is exhausting. I'm grateful to be here. I'm a 54-year-old native of Maine. I'm a lover of cats and the ocean. I'm a cross-country skier and an avid reader and a super nerd. I play video games with my kids, and I love RuPaul's Drag Race, Lady Gaga, and theology. I'm a gender non-binary queer clergy person, which explains why I am in drag, as my two trans kids call this outfit. My journey is a hero's journey only in format, and not because I am any kind of a hero. If you listen closely though, you will notice Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journeys framework. A couple trigger warnings. I reference my Christian faith and use the term gay as a catch-all, both of which are just in service of telling my story. I also want you to know that I will mention adoption, abortion, and suicidal ideation in case you wish to tune out for the next 15 or so minutes. My story is simply one example. I have had so many survivors reach out to tell me their stories over the years, and especially recently. I dedicate this time to them and send them my deepest love and respect. And so, I invite you to listen to my story in 3 parts and to think about your own story as we go. Also think about what we have learned so far today and about the many forms Soji change efforts take, and notice how insidious it can be and is. And after my story, I will share a few tips for your own journey of spiritual discovery. And please forgive that I will read this. Much of this I have never talked about before, and it's a bit tender in places. Part 1. I was a weird kid that always wanted to go to church. My parents were older, in their 40s when I was born in 1966. We lived near the ocean in Maine in the house that my dad built, next to a pond filled with all of the tadpoles a tomboy like me could catch. I loved being outdoors, but I loved church more, and I begged my parents to drive me to town so that I could visit every church that would let me in. It was weird because my parents weren't religious. They were, however, quite sure that I wasn't what a girl should be. And when I showed no interest in dating, they began to arrange for me to date. Older men, much older. It was creepy, to be honest. And I realize now that they were trying to, quote, straighten me out. Even though we never spoke of it, I was different. A little too interested in football. In fact, that was my first word, football, and not interested at all in dolls. The one guy I remember most clearly was their favorite, a man who was 30 years old to my 16, a catch in their eyes, but I just spent my time trying to keep his hands off me. But I did what my parents wanted and tried to conform to being the good girl who dated. And my parents kept up their end of the bargain and let me go to church, and even to the very conservative Christian college I was dying to attend. I was sure that would be where I could get closest to God. God wasn't as close as the guy I started dating there, the first guy I dated who wasn't chosen by my parents. But my try at being a successful girl failed, however. I became pregnant. On our quiet campus, students and faculty would shout unkind things across the quad at me. Before long, I was kicked out of that school, a visible embarrassment and a walking scandal. And here's an aside. The rate of unplanned pregnancy for LGBT youth is higher, in fact, twice as high than for their heterosexual peers, for a variety of reasons. Trying to prove you are straight is one, and predators are another. For me, I was trying to be the girl I was supposed to be, but I could never get that just right. For my parents, my being pregnant was a scandal too much to bear, and I was ordered to have an abortion. I thought about it. realizing that an 18-year-old college reject wasn't going to be the best mother. But then again, even though my evangelical pastors, friends, and professors now shunned me, I felt that I should conform to their teaching that abortion was wrong. It was a battle that went on for a couple months, with my mother especially pushing me to have an abortion. But I couldn't. I was trying hard to do what I thought God wanted me to do, to conform to the faith I had been taught. Maybe then I could be forgiven. I had the baby on a bitterly cold morning in February of 1986. After she was born, I was asked if I wanted to hold her. I said no, my heart had had enough. Part 2, fast forward a few years. After I gave the baby up for adoption, my mother tried to get her back. That was a thing. She was so disappointed that she couldn't get the baby back that she kicked me out of the house. Newly homeless, I married the baby's father and settled into 5 years of being what I call housebound. Once a week, I left the house to buy groceries, but otherwise I stayed at home. I felt empty. I felt that even though I had tried as hard as I could to be a good daughter, a good Christian, I was shameful and hated by my family, my church, my friends, and my college. I felt as though God was so disappointed in me, and the spirituality and faith I longed for just disappeared. But after 5 years, something good happened. My son was born. Because of him, I had to leave the house, to go to the pediatrician, and then to take him to school. I slowly emerged back into the world, blinking a bit and very unsure of myself, and subject to panic attacks from being in public. I found a new church and tried to find a new group of friends who had no idea of my shame. And I made it my mission to find a spiritual home and to conform. And conform I did. I threw myself into motherhood and had 3 more children, became a Sunday school teacher, and joined the Junior League and the Daughters of the American Revolution. It was my goal to be a perfect wife and mother, the perfect deacon and then elder at church, to be an irreproachable model of a Christian wife, because I knew that then God would love me. But I failed again. My husband found someone else and he left. Faced with raising and supporting 4 children on my own, I knew I needed to return to college and finish my bachelor's degree. I worked full-time and took classes at night. And after I earned my degree, I took the advice of my pastor to go to seminary and become a pastor myself. I threw myself into Master of Divinity studies and continued to work full-time as well in raising my 4 children. But then the crash of 2007 happened, and the home I had saved for, the first place that was my own, was foreclosed. When my father asked me to come back to Maine to the home I grew up in to take care of my mom, who had just been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, I said yes. Maybe this time I would be a good enough daughter. I could finish seminary there and get a job as a pastor, and my kids could catch tadpoles. It could work. And it kind of worked. I was in a groove at my seminary, almost done with the 5 years of study and various internships and oral exams and personality tests and Greek and Hebrew. But the last task of seminary was my biggest test, meeting gay people. I had to do a 3-month stint as a hospital chaplain for something called clinical pastoral education. That meant that I returned to the local hospital my daughter had been born in 22 years before on that winter's morning. And another aside, I realized this just last night when I was thinking about what I was going to say today, that same hospital. And it meant that I had to work with other seminary students from all over the country. I met people from progressive religions and even an atheist theological student. I liked the atheist, but the gay one scared me to death because, and maybe you have figured this out, I had no idea I was queer. Seriously, it seems ridiculous to be 40 as I was at the time and not realize that, but I didn't. I knew I was different, but I always thought I just wasn't ever good enough. Now, at this time, I realized that I was both not good enough and also realized that I was hated by God and going to hell, as some people said. So at this point, I was done, and I started planning ending my life and getting it over with. Enough was enough. I was through with looking for faith. I was through with this journey of missteps and failure. I was done. It's funny that thinking of ending things has been a constant companion of mine. I have had both a longing for God and a desire to stop being a failure over and over. But before I could complete that plan, my mom needed to go into the hospital, which prompted my dad to become violent with my kids and our pets. And so, having no money and facing violence at home, I asked my ex-husband, the kids' dad, to take them into his home with his new wife and child. I gave away our pets and went to live in my car while I kept planning how to die without hurting my children. And it was winter and so cold. Part 3. Fast forward a few years. I didn't die. I talked with my advisor at my seminary to see if I could graduate, since I had completed everything but my senior exams and capstone. I shared with her that I was LGBT, and she told me firmly that that was not true. I assured her that it was. She then suggested that I not tell anyone, and if the topic came up at my final senior exam in front of the entire seminary and all the church leaders, that I should lie. I thought about it. It had been a long 5 years of school, and I so wanted to graduate and get a job. But I decided that I couldn't lie. That was who I was, and I should continue to live in my car until I could find a way to support myself. But then something amazing happened. One of the LGBT students I met while I was a chaplain suggested I try their seminary and finish my degree there. That new to me seminary actually liked LGBT people and even had some LGBT pastors and professors. So I went to Missouri and enrolled and took more classes and learned that LGBT people are loved by God, and that the terrible Bible passages that some say condemn LGBT people actually don't mean what most people think they mean. I did struggle mightily with reconciling being gay and gender non-binary with being a Christian. But I found new books to read and role models to teach me that I was still following Jesus, and now with a very fresh perspective. I actually started to like myself for the first time in my life, and I began to think about how I could use my new self as an ordained LGBT minister to help others. I was starting to feel as if spirituality might be close to being within my grasp. I graduated and decided to take a job pastoring a new church in Salt Lake City. I really wanted to help LGBT youth experiencing homelessness. So when I got to Utah, our new church started bringing fresh hot meals and supplies to about 60 youth experiencing homelessness in and around Salt Lake. I became an outspoken advocate and activist, and before long, I was hired by an LGBT youth center to be their executive director. Running an LGBT youth center felt like such a good fit for me. The work I was doing with homeless youth through the church would be a perfect complement to the LGBT youth center. There was, however, one problem. My very first day of work at the center, my new boss called to say that she didn't want me to use my new professional title, Reverend, and actually she didn't want me to let on that I had a church or even was a person of faith. The youth have been hurt enough by religion, she said. I was disappointed. Not that I was planning to talk about religion with the youth, but rather I was disappointed that I had to hide my faith to go into the closet, in effect. Still, I was so happy to have a job and so happy to work with queer youth. It was fine, and actually it made sense. Religion does hurt LGBT youth. I'd experienced that firsthand. I loved that work, both jobs, and I thought I could easily do both the church and the center, and I could for a little while. But the 17 youth soon became dozens, and before long we counted 700 youth each month from 3 states. I stopped working at the church and only worked at the center, and I was successful at hiding my faith identity, but I started to notice something. The LGBT youth at the center began talking about faith with each other and with the staff. I decided to start a faith discussion group just to see if there was interest. And it became our most popular activity, with the youth happily quizzing the LGBT guest speakers I invited each week. I still wasn't out. I noticed it with amusement because my own faith was something I hardly ever thought about now. I mean, why bother? But then one day, something happened that changed everything for me. We had dozens of homeless youth at our center, and virtually everyone had a notebook that was a prized possession. And one day I asked, why? Why the notebook? A youth replied, "This is how I talk to God." God is all I have left. It was that moment, finally, that the entire journey I had been on, my striving for acceptance as a good daughter, a good wife, a good church member, on and on and on, all of that swirled around. And I could finally see that this spirituality I had been chasing so hard, this yearning for God that was a brass ring I could never grab, I finally realized that I'd been carrying it with me all along. That little kernel of spirituality in me when I was a tomboy catching frogs in Maine was all I needed. That spirituality was just there, like being LGBT and non-binary. Spirituality was something I was born with and something I didn't need to chase. These youth, most of whom were homeless because of religious parents who had rejected them, they didn't believe the lie that God hated them, no matter how many times they had heard it. They knew something I finally could see. Their spirituality was their own, and it traveled with them to our youth center and onto the railway car that would take them to the next city, and in the form of carefully scripted poems and prayers and drawings and stories of love and loss, hope and dreams. Those youth continue to inspire me to this day, every day. The key then is accepting that gift, like accepting who we are in our beautiful rainbow diversity, different in such exciting and challenging ways, and just waiting to be noticed. That's my story. I'm going to give you just a few tips before we break for a Q&A. I invite you, when you have time, to think about your own journey. Each of us is born into a religious framework, or kind of a weird framework like I was. But just like being born into a family that's Republican or Democrat, you grow up to either embrace the political views of your parents or you develop your own. Your spirituality is exactly the same way. It's innate, it's part of you. You've been influenced by your family and your culture, but ultimately you choose your own spiritual expression, choose your own adventure, from being a stalwart of a particular religion to one of the thousands of different ways you can be spiritual. No one can take that away from you. Your spiritual roots are your own. Tip number 1, keep a journal and notice what is meaningful to you. What seems like it's out of the ordinary, what seems like, whether it's the natural world or your relationships, just notice things that give you a sense of wonder or a sense of connection or a sense of gratitude. Write it down and then start to look for patterns, but don't label it. Or if you decide to label it, use your own label and not a name the world might give it. Your notebook will guide you to notice where your natural spirituality is. Explore connections and experiences with people who share your own natural spirituality. Listen for what they call it. And this might be easy, like yoga or communing with nature or the fill in the blank church or meditation, mysticism, on and on. It might be a mixture of one or more, or it might be something new. It's yours and it's wonderful. If it takes a while to figure this out, that is beautiful. Enjoy, seriously, enjoy that journey of discovery. And perhaps that is your own spirituality, the journey, and that's beautiful. Whatever affirms you, whatever gives you life and energizes you, grounds you, that is your spiritual self. And what a gift it is to you and to the world. Thank you.